If you learned how to read a room before you learned how to relax, if you could tell from a parent's footsteps whether tonight was going to be safe or explosive, if you became mature before you ever felt protected, then you didn't just grow up fast. You grew up strategic, not because you wanted power, but because you needed safety. Today, I'm going to show you something most people never realize: how a child in a chaotic home becomes a master of emotional survival, and why that same skill set can quietly sabotage your adult life. Micro pause. If this feels personal, that's not an accident. Today, I'm going to show you something you've never seen: your childhood through the eyes of history's most famous strategist. The silent court you grew up in Machiavelli. Observe something simple and brutal. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. Now imagine a child in a chaotic home. On the outside, they appear mature, responsible, the good one. Teachers praise them. Relatives say they're so grown up for their age, they do not cause trouble. They get things done. But inside, something else is happening. They are keeping secrets. They are smoothing over conflicts. They are checking the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the slam of doors, the way a parent's face tightens before they speak. Psychology has a name for this: parentification. But that clinical term doesn't capture what it actually feels like. Being 7 years old and responsible for a 40-year-old's emotional regulation. Research on parentified children shows something striking. These kids don't just do extra chores. They become the family's emotional thermostat, constantly adjusting the temperature before things overheat. Here's what no one tells you: the skills that saved you as a child are the same ones slowly destroying you as an adult. You were living in a small, private court, not of nobles and ministers, but of volatile adults, checked-out caregivers, or people drowning in their own pain. And you learned quickly: if you don't read the room, manage the mood, and say the right things, things fall apart. Someone yells, someone drinks, someone cries, someone leaves. So you adapted. You became the emotional thermostat of the household. Fear, love, and the price of safety. Machiavelli is famous for one line: it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. In a healthy home, a child does not have to choose between the two. Love is consistent and fear is rare. But in a survival mode home, that quote becomes deeply personal. A child in that environment discovers something. Pleasing others brings a little safety. Disappointing others brings chaos. Being good is rewarded. Being too much is punished, mocked, or ignored. Love starts to feel like a transaction. If I keep the peace, I am accepted. If I express my needs, I am a problem. So the child makes an unconscious choice. It is better to be useful than to be real. Better to be needed than to be fully seen. Dr. Jonas Webb, who pioneered research on childhood emotional neglect, discovered something devastating. Children who grow up emotionally responsible for their parents develop what she calls emotional loneliness. The profound isolation of being surrounded by people but never truly seen. They fear being a burden. They fear being too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding. And so, slowly, they trade authenticity for security. The disappearing child and the good mask. There is a moment, though you may not remember it, when this trade became permanent. Maybe you were the one who comforted a crying parent. Maybe you protected a younger sibling. Maybe you tried to make jokes at the dinner table to distract everyone from the tension. At some point you realized, no one is coming to rescue me from this, so I will rescue them instead. In that moment, you stopped being only a child. You became a strategist. You learned that dad's silence meant everyone needed to be quieter, that mom's "I'm fine" required you to become smaller, funnier, or invisible. You memorized which version of you each person needed. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. On the outside, you appeared strong. Inside, you were tired, scared, and alone. And here's the cruelest part. The world will reward you for it. On one side, you are competent, respected, organized, high-achieving. You handle crises well. You are the rock for everyone else. On the other side, you feel underdeveloped when it comes to simple things, asking for help, resting without guilt, trusting that someone will stay, relaxing without scanning for danger. It is not that you missed out on maturity. You just learned responsibility before safety, strength before softness. The nervous system of a strategist Machiavelli admired the leader who could adapt quickly. The wise man does at once what the fool does finally. In your childhood, you did not have the luxury of waiting. You adapted early. You developed what some call superpowers, hyper-awareness, emotional radar, the ability to sense a shift in tone before a single word is spoken. But those superpowers had a cost. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps the Score, explains that when children grow up in unpredictable environments, their nervous systems become wired for threat detection. Your body learned to treat peace as a prelude to danger. When the body is raised in constant stress, calm stops feeling safe. Silence can feel like the pause before an explosion. So as an adult, you may notice something strange. You thrive in crisis but struggle with the small things. You can handle a family emergency or a demanding job, but asking for emotional support, saying, "I'm not okay," without apologizing, letting someone take care of you, that feels harder. Being needed feels natural. Being loved for just existing feels unfamiliar. Here's the truth. A study published in Development and Psychopathology found that parentified children are up to 3 times more likely to experience chronic anxiety and depression in adulthood, not because they're weak, but because their bodies never learned what safety feels like. Imagine this. You're celebrating a promotion. Your partner makes you dinner and tells you to relax. And sitting there, in that moment of genuine care, your chest tightens. Your mind races. You feel an urgent need to clean, to work, to do something. Because sitting still in someone's kindness feels more dangerous than any deadline ever did. That's not you being difficult. That's a nervous system that was trained to associate stillness with ambush. When the world rewards your wounds, the world often praises the very traits that grew out of your pain. Hyperindependence becomes strong. Workaholism becomes ambitious. Never asking for help becomes reliable. Always fixing other people's problems becomes selfless. You're labeled Type A, a high achiever, a natural leader. No one sees that your productivity is partly a trauma response. Moving keeps you from feeling. Achieving keeps you from risking rejection. As long as you are useful, you believe you cannot be abandoned. Machiavelli wrote extensively about appearances, how a ruler must appear merciful, faithful, humane, even when reality is more complex. You learn the same rule at age 8. Society sees the mask, capable, composed, endlessly giving. Few people experience the exhaustion underneath. Fewer still understand that you never really learned how to be held. This creates a painful paradox. The better you are at performing strength, the harder it is for anyone to recognize your hunger for safety, softness, and rest. This is why you keep choosing the same painful relationship over and over again. Love that feels wrong. Many adults who grew up too fast find themselves drawn to people who need fixing, partners who are chaotic, wounded, or unstable, friends who always have a crisis. On paper, you might say you want stability. In practice, you end up in familiar roles: the therapist, the caretaker, the responsible one. Why? Because in childhood, you learned a specific equation: being needed equals being loved. If someone depends on you, they will not leave. Dr. Pia Melody, who specializes in codependency and childhood trauma, identified what she calls carried shame. The belief that your value exists only in what you can do for others, not in who you are. Healthy, consistent love can feel almost wrong. When someone offers steady care without you earning it, your nervous system doesn't recognize it as love. It might interpret it as suspicious, boring, or unearned. You scan for the hidden cost. You wait for the other shoe to drop. You may even sabotage or pull away, not because you don't want love, but because you don't know how to relax in it. Machiavelli was preoccupied with loyalty, how quickly it can vanish when circumstances change. A child of an unstable home knows this intuitively. They know that the people who say, "I love you," can also be the ones who hurt you, neglect you, or disappear. So you grow up wary, attached, but braced for impact. And beneath all of this, beneath the hyper-independence, the caretaking, the compulsive productivity, there's something else lurking: guilt. Not the kind you feel when you do something wrong. The kind you feel when you simply exist with needs. When you were young, your needs may have been treated as inconveniences. Too much noise, too many questions, too many emotions. Maybe you heard, "Stop being dramatic. You're too sensitive. Other people have it worse." So you adapted, you minimized, you swallowed feelings. You learned to cry alone. As an adult, you might hear a quiet voice every time you need support. You're bothering them. Handle it yourself. Don't be weak. This is not a moral failing. This is conditioning. In Machiavelli's world, a prince cannot afford certain vulnerabilities in public. Your childhood taught you the same rule. Vulnerability is dangerous, needs are risky, and emotions must be controlled. But you are not a prince in a hostile court. You are a person whose nervous system was shaped by pressure it never should have carried. Witnessing the child strategist. So what now? The first movement of healing is not fixing, it's witnessing. Before you change anything, you have to see the truth of what happened to you, not as a story you should be over, not as something you minimize because others had it worse, but as 1,000 small moments that trained your body to be on guard and your mind to stay in control. That child who became the family's emotional anchor did not choose power. They chose survival. To sit quietly and say, "Of course I am tired. Of course I struggle to rest. Of course I find it hard to trust safe love." This is not self-pity. It is accuracy, shadow work, and the parts you hid for the child who grew up too fast. The shadow was usually full of normal, healthy needs that were never allowed space. The need to be comforted, the need to play, the need to be messy, the need to be wrong without being shamed. When you ignore these parts, they don't disappear. They show up as numbness, sudden outbursts, or a constant feeling that something is missing. Shadow work is about turning toward the younger you that was left in the corner while the strong version of you performed. It can look like simple things, letting yourself rest on a day you feel guilty for being unproductive, admitting, "I wish someone would take care of me for once," allowing sadness about the childhood you didn't have, without immediately forcing a silver lining. These acts are how you start to renegotiate power with your own story. Self-reparenting, a different kind of power. Machiavelli's world was obsessed with outer power, controlling others, controlling outcomes, controlling image. Your childhood may have trained you in similar ways. You might feel safe only when you are managing everything and everyone. But there is another form of power available now, one that wasn't available to you as a child, the power to reparent yourself. Dr. Tori Rodriguez describes self-reparenting as becoming the secure attachment figure you needed but didn't have, speaking to yourself with the patience, compassion, and consistency your younger self deserved. In practice, it can sound like this: you are allowed to rest, even if everything is not perfect. You are allowed to say no, even if someone is disappointed. You are allowed to be a beginner at being cared for. At first, your body might reject this. That's expected. You're teaching a nervous system that survived on fear and control how to live with something softer. Over time, instead of a frightened child trying to be a ruler, you become an adult who can hold both, the strategist who once saved you, and the child who never got to simply be. Reframing your story. You were not born hyper-independent or obsessed with control. You were trained by necessity in a home that operated more like a dangerous court than a sanctuary. You became a kind of unconscious strategist, reading faces the way a ruler reads factions, managing tensions the way a prince manages alliances. Machiavelli might have admired your adaptation. Psychology, however, adds one more truth. You are allowed to lay down the crown you never asked to wear. Your worth is not in how well you manage everyone's emotions. It is not in how productive, composed, or useful you are. Those skills kept you alive. They made you respected. But they are not the only version of you. Beneath the strategist is a child who was never weak, just early. Early to responsibility. Early to vigilance. Early to understanding that safety is not guaranteed. As an adult, real power is no longer controlling every variable. Real power is letting yourself experience a life that is not built entirely on fear. To let others see not just what you appear to be, but who you actually are. And to finally offer that younger you something they were never given, a world where they don't have to earn rest, love, or belonging by holding everything together. Where you start. Here's where you start. Not with fixing everything, not with understanding it all, but with one small act of treason against the rules you learned too young. Tonight before bed, say out loud, even if you're alone, I am allowed to need help. Your body won't believe it yet. That's okay. You're teaching your nervous system a language it was never allowed to learn. The language of being human, not just strategic. But here's the question that changes everything. Why do you believe that needing others makes you weak when it's actually the thing that makes you human? That belief wasn't your idea. It was planted in you by people who needed you to be small so they could stay broken. And now you get to ask yourself, do I still want to live by their rules, or am I ready to write my own? Here's what you need to know. Neuroplasticity research from Dr. Rick Hansen shows that the brain can rewire itself at any age. Those neural pathways that scream danger every time someone offers you care, they can be reshaped slowly, consistently, through repeated experiences of safety. You are not permanently damaged. You are adaptable. You've already proven that. It starts with small, rebellious acts, letting someone else plan the outing without you controlling every detail. Saying, I'm struggling, without immediately following it with, but I'm fine. Accepting a compliment without deflecting. Sitting through a moment of care without filling the silence with productivity. These may feel like betrayals at first, betrayals of the child who learned that vigilance kept everyone alive. But they're not betrayals. They're invitations. Invitations to let that child finally rest, knowing that you, the adult, can keep them safe now, not by controlling everything, but by choosing environments, people, and moments where control isn't necessary. Machiavelli once wrote, "The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves." You spent your childhood being both the fox and the lion, cunning enough to avoid danger, strong enough to protect others. But here's what Machiavelli never wrote about, because his world had no room for it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop being both. Sometimes the truest power is letting yourself be neither the protector nor the protector, nor the protected, just a person, learning to trust that the world won't collapse if you finally exhale. That is where your story begins to change. And if you found yourself in these words, if you felt seen in a way you rarely allow yourself to be seen, I want you to do 3 things. First, leave a comment below with just one word that describes what you're feeling right now. No explanations needed, just one word. This helps the algorithm show this video to others who need to see it. But more importantly, it helps you practice naming what you feel without justifying it. Second, subscribe to this channel if you want to go deeper into the patterns you can't seem to break. The relationships that keep repeating, and the parts of you still waiting for permission to exist. We're building a community of people who are done performing and ready to heal. You were not born hyper-independent. You were trained. You were not obsessed with control. You were conditioned. You wore a crown you never asked for. And now you get to decide. Do I keep living by rules I learned in survival, or do I write new ones in safety? Tonight, try one small act of rebellion. When someone offers you kindness, don't earn it, don't repay it, don't minimize it, just receive it, not because you're weak, but because you no longer have to be strategic to be worthy.